Imagine a place where the air hangs thick and heavy with the scent of damp earth and a million undiscovered blossoms. Towering canopies form a cathedral of green so dense that sunlight struggles to pierce through, dappling the forest floor in a shifting mosaic of light and shadow. This is New Guinea, the world's second largest island, a land that time seems to have forgotten. It holds one of the last great rainforests on Earth, a sanctuary for creatures of almost mythical strangeness. Tree kangaroos that hop through the branches, birds of paradise with plumage so vibrant it seems to defy reality. This is a world teeming with life, a biological treasure chest that contains an estimated 10% of all species on our planet. It's a place of breathtaking wonder, a final frontier of natural discovery. But this vision of a pristine paradise, while breathtakingly real, tells only half the story. Peel back the lush green canopy and you find a land fractured by a line drawn on a map by distant powers. This single island is split into two distinct and profoundly different worlds. To the east lies Papua New Guinea, an independent nation that threw off the shackles of Australian colonial rule in 1975, a country brimming with cultural pride, yet grappling with the immense challenges of forging a modern identity. To the west lies West Papua, a region absorbed into Indonesia under circumstances that many of its indigenous people still fiercely contest. Here, the dream of freedom is not a historical memory, but a burning present-day struggle against a backdrop of military presence and suppression. This division has created a paradox that defines the island's existence. How can a place so rich in natural beauty and cultural diversity also be a stage for hidden conflicts, resource exploitation, and geopolitical maneuvering? The answer lies in a story of promises broken, of wealth extracted, and of voices silenced. From the outside, we might see images of remote tribes and exotic wildlife, but we rarely hear about the low-intensity warfare simmering in the western highlands or the political battles being waged over its future. This is not just a story about nature, it's a story about people whose lives are shaped by forces far beyond their control, from corporate boardrooms in Houston to government halls in Beijing and Washington. The island's dual identity is a constant source of tension. In one half, you have a sovereign nation trying to navigate the treacherous waters of global politics and economic development on its own terms. In the other, you have a people who feel their identity is being erased, their lands taken, and their right to self-determination denied. This isn't a simple narrative of good versus evil. It's a complex tapestry woven from threads of history, culture, economics, and power. To truly understand New Guinea, we must look beyond the postcard images and confront the uncomfortable reality of a paradise that is also a battleground. A place where the fight for the soul of the land is happening right now, largely out of sight of the rest of the world. To understand the deep wounds that scar New Guinea today, you have to rewind the clock to a time when European powers carved up the globe with little regard for the people who lived there. For centuries, the island was a mosaic of hundreds of distinct tribes, each with its own language, customs, and territory. But in the 19th century, this complex human landscape was crudely dissected. The Dutch claimed the western half, the Germans took the northeast, and the British seized the southeast. These lines, drawn on maps thousands of miles away, were the first seeds of the division that would later harden into a permanent political border, splitting families, tribes, and ancient trade routes in two. For the people of New Guinea, their world was being redefined by outsiders who saw the island not as a home, but as a resource to be controlled. After World War I, Germany's portion was handed over to Australia, which already administered the British territory. This consolidated the entire eastern half under Australian rule. For decades, this part of the island was managed as a colony, a place to be developed and prepared for eventual, and what would turn out to be peaceful independence. But the fate of the western half, known then as Dutch New Guinea, was far more turbulent. As the era of colonialism waned after World War II, the Netherlands began preparing West Papua for its own independence. A new flag, the Morning Star, was raised, A national anthem was composed, and the dream of a sovereign Papuan nation seemed within reach. It was a moment of incredible hope and promise for the indigenous people. But this dream was shattered by the cold, hard geopolitics of the Cold War. A newly independent and ambitious Indonesia, under President Sukarno, laid claim to the territory, arguing it was the rightful heir to all former Dutch colonies in the region. The United States, fearing that Indonesia might pivot toward the Soviet Union if its demands were not met, pressured the Dutch to abandon their plans for Papuan independence. In 1962, under the shadow of a potential conflict, control of West Papua was transferred to the United Nations with the understanding that it would soon be handed over to Indonesia. The Papuans themselves, who had been on the cusp of freedom, were never given a seat at the table. Their future was decided for them. The final act of this colonial tragedy came in 1969 with an event called the Act of Free Choice. This was supposed to be a UN-supervised referendum to allow the Papuan people to decide their own fate. Instead of a one-person, one-vote system, the Indonesian military handpicked just 1,025 representatives and, according to countless reports, coerced them into voting unanimously to join Indonesia. This deeply flawed process, derided by critics as the act of no choice, gave a veneer of international legitimacy to Indonesia's annexation of West Papua. That single event became the source of an enduring conflict, creating a legacy of bitterness and resistance that has fueled a struggle for independence for more than half a century. In the rugged highlands and dense jungles of West Papua, a quiet but brutal conflict has been raging for decades, largely invisible to the outside world. This is not a war of front lines and conventional armies, but a guerrilla struggle waged by the West Papua National Liberation Army against the Indonesian state. For them, the fight is a continuation of the dream of independence that was stolen from them in 1969. Raising the Morning Star flag, a symbol of their national identity, is considered an act of treason by Indonesian authorities and can lead to a long prison sentence. This simple act of defiance encapsulates the heart of the conflict, a struggle for cultural survival and political freedom against a state that sees their land as an integral and non-negotiable part of its territory. The human cost of this long-simmering conflict is staggering. While precise figures are impossible to verify, human rights organizations and researchers estimate that anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 indigenous Papuans have lost their lives since the 1960s due to military operations, extrajudicial killings, and related hardships. I spoke with a woman who fled her village in the Nduga Regency after a military crackdown. She described how soldiers descended on her community, forcing her and her family to hide in the forest for weeks with little food, her children sick and terrified. Stories like hers are tragically common. The United Nations has reported shocking abuses, including the killing of children and the displacement of tens of thousands of people, yet the conflict rarely makes international headlines. This struggle for self-determination has been systematically suppressed. Indonesia's transmigration policy has encouraged millions of people from other more crowded islands like Java and Sulawesi to settle in West Papua. The result is a dramatic demographic shift. In many urban areas and coastal regions, indigenous Papuans are now a minority in their own land. Activists describe a pervasive atmosphere of fear where surveillance is constant and dissent is met with a heavy hand. Local journalists, human rights defenders, and anyone suspected of sympathizing with the independence movement face intimidation, arrest, and violence. The world's attention briefly turned to the region in 2023 when a New Zealand pilot was taken hostage by a rebel faction, but that spotlight quickly faded, leaving the Papuan people once again in the shadows. For the people of West Papua, this is more than a political fight. It is a fight for their very existence. They see their unique Melanesian culture being diluted, their sacred lands being exploited for resources, and their people being marginalized. A young activist I met, whose father was imprisoned for his political beliefs, told me they can take our land and our resources, but they can never take the spirit of Papua from our hearts. We are not Indonesians. We are Papuans. And one day, the world will have to listen. His words echo the sentiment of a people who have refused to let their dream of freedom die, no matter the cost. Their struggle is a powerful reminder that the echoes of colonialism still reverberate today, shaping lives and fueling conflicts in the world's most remote corners. Across the invisible border, the story of Papua New Guinea offers a stark contrast, yet it is also filled with its own profound challenges. In 1975, Papua New Guinea achieved independence from Australia peacefully, without the bloodshed and forced annexation that defined West Papua's fate. It was a moment of immense national pride and optimism. For the first time, this incredibly diverse nation, home to over 800 distinct languages and cultures, would chart its own course. The country embraced democracy and set out to build a future for its people. Unlike their neighbors to the west, the people of Papua New Guinea had their freedom. But they soon discovered that sovereignty comes with a heavy price and its own set of complex problems. The dream of a unified, prosperous nation has been difficult to realize. The same rugged terrain that created its incredible cultural diversity also makes it incredibly difficult to govern. Many communities remain isolated with little access to roads, schools, or healthcare. The government, based in the capital of Port Moresby, has struggled to extend its authority and services into the remote highlands and islands. This has created a power vacuum often filled by local strongmen or tribal allegiances. Widespread political corruption has siphoned away billions of dollars in resource revenue, leaving a trail of broken promises and fueling deep public cynicism. For many ordinary citizens, independence has not translated into a better life. This internal fragility erupted into a brutal civil war on the island of Bougainville. The conflict, which raged for a decade starting in 1988, was ignited by disputes over the massive Panguna copper and gold mine. Local landowners felt they were seeing none of the immense wealth being extracted from their ancestral land while suffering devastating environmental consequences. The rebellion escalated into a full-blown secessionist war that cost an estimated 20,000 lives, a devastating toll for a small island population. Although a peace agreement was eventually signed, the scars run deep. In a historic non-binding referendum in 2019, the people of Bougainville voted overwhelmingly by 98% for independence from Papua New Guinea, a decision that Papua New Guinea's parliament has yet to ratify. The Bougainville crisis highlights the central paradox of Papua New Guinea. It is a nation built on colonial-era boundaries that often clash with older, more deeply felt ethnic and tribal identities. While it enjoys political freedom, the country is constantly battling the forces of fragmentation from within. The government faces the immense task of managing intense intercommunal violence in its highlands, tackling systemic corruption, and delivering basic development to its people, all while trying to hold the nation together. The story of Papua New Guinea is a sobering lesson that independence is not an endpoint, but the beginning of a long and arduous journey filled with its own battles for stability, justice, and prosperity. New Guinea sits on a geological jackpot. Deep beneath its pristine rainforests lie some of the world's most valuable deposits of gold, copper, oil, and natural gas. This immense natural wealth should have been a blessing, a golden ticket to development and prosperity for the people of the island. Instead, for many communities, it has been a curse. The story of resource extraction in both West Papua and Papua New Guinea is a story of staggering profits for multinational corporations and foreign governments, but widespread poverty, environmental devastation, and social conflict for the people who call the island home. The wealth flows out, but very little of it ever trickles down to the villages, whose lands and rivers are being transformed forever. In West Papua, the Grasberg mine stands as a monumental symbol of this disparity. For decades, it was the world's largest gold mine and third largest copper mine. Operated by the American company Freeport-McMoran, it has generated well over $100 billion in revenue, a colossal sum that has enriched its foreign investors and the Indonesian state. Yet West Papua remains the poorest region in Indonesia. A staggering number of its indigenous people live below the poverty line, struggling with some of the worst health and education outcomes in the country. The mine itself has carved a massive wound into a sacred mountain and has dumped billions of tons of waste directly into local river systems, poisoning the water and destroying the livelihoods of downstream communities. The situation is tragically similar in Papua New Guinea. Take the $19 billion ExxonMobil-led LNG project, one of the largest investments in the country's history. It was promoted with promises of jobs, infrastructure, and a massive boost to the national economy. But years after the gas started flowing, many landowners who signed away their rights are still waiting for the promised benefits. They watch as pipelines cross their ancestral lands and tankers ship their resources overseas, while their own communities lack basic services like clean water and electricity. This has created deep resentment and fueled conflicts, with some frustrated groups resorting to sabotage and protest to make their voices heard. The promised prosperity remains a distant dream for those who have paid the highest price. The environmental cost of this resource rush has been catastrophic. Unregulated logging, often carried out by foreign companies with powerful connections, is tearing down the rainforest at an alarming rate. Rivers that once provided clean drinking water and bountiful fish are now choked with sediment and toxic chemicals from mining operations. This isn't just an environmental issue, it's a human rights issue. For indigenous communities, the land is not a commodity. It is the very foundation of their culture, their spirituality, and their physical survival. When the forest is destroyed and the rivers are poisoned, their entire way of life is threatened. The curse of gold is the bitter irony that the very thing that makes their land so valuable to outsiders is also the thing that is destroying it. In the face of overwhelming pressure from governments and global corporations, the indigenous peoples of New Guinea are not passive victims. They are fighters. For generations, they have been the keepers of this land, and today they are on the front lines of a global battle to protect their culture, their rights, and their environment. Their resistance takes many forms, from organized political advocacy and legal challenges to grassroots activism and courageous acts of defiance. They are fighting to have their voices heard in a world that has for too long ignored them, demanding a say in the future of the lands that have sustained them for millennia. Their resilience is a powerful testament to the enduring strength of their connection to their heritage. In Papua New Guinea, local communities are increasingly organizing to stand up to powerful logging and mining interests. I met a landowner named Maria from a village in Madang province who helped lead a campaign against a proposed seabed mining project. She and other local women organized protests, blockaded roads, and used social media to share their story with the world. They argued that the project would destroy their fishing grounds and threaten their entire way of life. "This ocean is our garden," she told me, her voice filled with passion. "We will not let them destroy it for profit." Her story is not unique. Across the country, communities are learning to use the legal system and the power of advocacy to challenge projects that threaten their lands and livelihoods. Across the border in West Papua, the struggle for rights is intrinsically linked to the fight for independence. Here, resistance is often more dangerous and covert. Activists work at great personal risk to document human rights abuses and smuggle the information out to international organizations. They use art, music, and cultural festivals to keep their Papuan identity alive in the face of policies aimed at assimilation. One of the most powerful symbols of this cultural resistance is the noken, a traditional hand-woven bag. In 2012, UNESCO recognized the noken as an item of intangible cultural heritage in need of urgent safeguarding, a small but significant victory that brought international recognition to a cornerstone of Papuan identity. These acts of resistance, both large and small, are part of a growing global movement for indigenous rights. Papuan leaders are now traveling to international forums like the United Nations to plead their case building alliances with other indigenous groups from the Amazon to the Arctic. They are demanding that the principle of free, prior, and informed consent be respected, which would give them the right to approve or reject any project planned on their ancestral lands. It is a slow, difficult, and often frustrating process, but they are making progress. They are the keepers of one of the world's last great wildernesses, and their fight is a fight for all of us who believe that culture and nature are more precious than gold. For decades, New Guinea was considered a remote backwater, far from the centers of global power, but that is changing and changing fast. The island has become a new and critical chessboard in the escalating geopolitical competition between the United States and China. Its strategic location, commanding vital sea lanes between the Pacific and Indian Oceans, and its vast natural resources have suddenly made it a prized piece in a high-stakes game for influence in the Indo-Pacific region. This new, great game is bringing a surge of attention and investment to the island, but it also risks turning it into a proxy battleground with potentially devastating consequences for its people and their sovereignty. China has been aggressively expanding its influence across the Pacific, and Papua New Guinea has been a key target. Beijing has poured billions of dollars into infrastructure projects, building roads, ports, and government buildings. Through its Belt and Road initiative, it has become a major trading partner and a significant investor in PNG's mining and logging sectors. This economic diplomacy has won China considerable goodwill and influence within the country's political elite. For a developing nation hungry for investment, China's offer of no-strings-attached financing can be incredibly appealing. But critics worry this is creating unsustainable debt and making the country vulnerable to Beijing's political pressure. In response, the United States and its key regional ally Australia have dramatically stepped up their engagement to counter China's rise. In May 2023, the United States signed a landmark defense cooperation agreement with Papua New Guinea. This pact grants the United States military access to key ports and air bases across the country, effectively turning PNG into a potential logistics hub for American forces in the Pacific. Australia, PNG's traditional security partner, is also pouring in aid and helping to redevelop the Lombrum Naval Base on Manus Island. These moves are clearly aimed at solidifying a Western strategic foothold on the island and pushing back against China's ambitions. This escalating rivalry places the people of New Guinea in a precarious position, while their leaders try to play the superpowers against each other to maximize benefits. A foreign policy PNG calls friends to all, enemies to none. There is a real danger of being caught in the crossfire. The influx of foreign money and strategic interests can exacerbate corruption, weaken local governance, and undermine democratic institutions. Student protests erupted in PNG over the Defense Pact with the United States, with many fearing their country was being drawn into a conflict that was not its own. The great powers may see New Guinea as a strategic asset, but for the people who live there, the fear is that their home will once again be defined not by their own dreams, but by the ambitions of outsiders. Beyond the human dramas of conflict and geopolitics, there is another urgent story unfolding in New Guinea, an environmental one with consequences for the entire planet. The island's rainforest is the third largest in the world, after the Amazon and the Congo. It is a vast, ancient ecosystem that acts as one of the planet's essential lungs, absorbing enormous amounts of carbon dioxide and helping to regulate the global climate. It is also a cradle of biodiversity, home to an astonishing array of life, much of which is found nowhere else on Earth. The fate of this forest is not just a local issue, it is a matter of global importance. And right now, this precious ecosystem is on the brink. The threats are relentless and growing. Industrial logging, both legal and illegal, is carving up the forest at an unsustainable rate. Huge swaths of land are being cleared for commercial agriculture, especially for palm oil plantations, which are spreading rapidly across the island, particularly on the Indonesian side. New roads, like the massive Trans-Papua Highway being built by the Indonesian government, are cutting deep into previously untouched wilderness, opening up new frontiers for deforestation, settlement, and resource extraction. Scientists warn that if this destruction continues, it won't just mean the extinction of countless species, it will release a massive carbon bomb that would significantly accelerate global warming. But in the face of this looming crisis, there are glimmers of hope. A new awareness is dawning, both within New Guinea and internationally, about the critical need for conservation. In a landmark move, in 2024, the government of Papua New Guinea passed a new Protected Areas Act with the ambitious goal of conserving 30% of its land by the year 2030. This followed a similar commitment from Indonesia, the 2018 Manokwari Declaration, which pledged to protect 70% of the forests in its Papuan provinces. These are incredibly important steps, signaling a political will to shift from a model of pure extraction to one of sustainable management and conservation. The challenge, however, will be in turning these promises into reality. Enforcing conservation laws in such a remote and rugged landscape is incredibly difficult, especially in the face of powerful commercial interests and endemic corruption. Success will depend on empowering the local and indigenous communities who have the most at stake. They are the traditional guardians of the forest, and their knowledge is essential for effective conservation. The future of New Guinea's rainforests hinges on finding a new model of development, one that values the long-term health of the ecosystem over the short-term profits of its destruction. Protecting this great forest is one of the most significant environmental challenges of our time. The story of New Guinea is the story of our world in miniature. It is a breathtakingly beautiful place, a cradle of life and culture, but it is also a land grappling with the deepest challenges of our time: the legacy of colonialism, the fight for human rights, the devastating impact of resource extraction, and the urgent crisis of environmental destruction. Today, as global powers vie for influence over its future, this island stands at a critical crossroads. The choices made in the coming years by governments in Port Moresby and Jakarta, by corporations in boardrooms across the world, and by people like you and me will determine whether this paradise can be saved or if it will be lost forever. We can no longer afford to see New Guinea as a distant, exotic footnote on the world map. Its fate is connected to our own. The struggle of the West Papuan people for self-determination is a test of our global commitment to human rights and international law. The battle to protect its rainforests is a battle for the health of our entire planet. The geopolitical tensions playing out on its shores are a barometer of the stability of the Indo-Pacific region. What happens in New Guinea matters not just to the people who live there, but to all of us. Their fight for justice, dignity, and survival deserves our attention and our support. The path forward must be one that places the rights and well-being of the island's people at its center. It requires holding corporations accountable for environmental damage and ensuring that the benefits of natural resources flow back to the local communities. It means supporting the brave activists and indigenous leaders who are risking everything to protect their land and culture. It demands that the international community, including the United States, China, and Australia, prioritize peace and sustainable development over strategic competition. True stability will not come from military bases or infrastructure projects, but from justice, equity, and respect for the people who call New Guinea home. This is a moment of both peril and promise. The challenges are immense, but the resilience of the Papuan people and the growing recognition of the island's global importance offer a reason for hope. We, as a global community, have a responsibility to watch, to listen, and to act. We must amplify the voices that are being silenced and support those who are working for a better future. The fate of this last Eden, this divided paradise, is not yet sealed. It is a story that is still being written, and we all have a role to play in how it ends. The world must not look away.